All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Gray Area. My name is Rob Engel, and I'm here with Stu Hackley. He's the co founder of one of Chicago's premier house and techno festivals, which is ARC Festival. And the ARC team is gearing up for their second inaugural festival coming up this Labor Day weekend. And let me tell you, they're bringing in some heavy hitting DJs to the birthplace of house. So, Stu, really appreciate your time and thank you for being here on Gray Area.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always good to talk with you guys.
So, Stu, would love to start off if you could just tell us a little bit about your personal background and history and relationship with house and techno music. Arc Festival, and you can tell just by looking at the lineup, is a festival that really prioritizes the roots of house. So, I'd love if you could just start talking about your own personal passion for the genre and kind of how that led into the creation of Arc.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my personal background, I started listening to electronic in, man, it was like probably early 2000s, late 90s. I was young at the time, so barely, able to really have a primary interest in like what was really going on with electronic. Um, but kind of knew like I like this sound. And back then it was probably like it was a radio show called, I think it was called Transmissions or something, that came on the local station, which was HFS, that I would listen to, and probably didn't even know the artist at the time. But we were probably Oakenfold and Crystal Method and names like that, I would assume. So that was kind of like my earliest first exposure. And then when I got my first computer, started to find a lot of like the European radio stations that were around at the time. I think DIFM was one of them, a couple others, they've all come and gone at this point. So that was some of my earlier exposures, and came up a lot listening to trance and progressive, and then kind of graduated in other sounds. And house and techno really became a big part, I'd say, in the last couple of years. And it's something I've always listened to and had interest to, and kind of explored and discovered some of my own artists. But there wasn't much of a scene for it in the US, kind of coming up in like the 2010, 2011, 12 range when I did. And the scene that was there was primarily in the major cities. So where I was in school at the time in the Carolinas, there wasn't a whole lot going on with it. So by listening and discovering, new artists on my own, it was kind of like a very solo kind of personal thing. Not a lot of people were into it. And then fast forward to meeting the other partners in Arc and Aris, which are John and Nick, in 2019. And we all kind of discovered, we all obviously had a mutual interest in a lot of different styles of electronic music. And when the pandemic hit, and we kind of had that forced downtime where we stopped, and we all thought, okay, well, what does the city really need? What does this market want? And John Curley, who has a super deep history in Chicago, but also in house and techno. I mean, he has been doing house and techno in the city since some of its inceptions, right? Like, you name some of the legendary artists that we talk about in house and techno, whether they're on ARC or not. He's been working with them in Chicago and helping progress the scene for a very, very long time. But when we asked ourselves that question, what does the city really need, or the market in general really need? And I think it was John that said, I'd love to do like something in house and techno that puts it on a bigger scale. And so that was kind of how art came about, but also how all of our personal tastes kind of influenced it coming about. And the three of us really putting our heads together, thinking about what can we do here.
Absolutely. And you're gearing up for the second inaugural festival this year. And frankly, your lineup is stacked with some legends. You've got Carl Cox, Honey Dijon, Seth Troxler, Derek Carter, Mark Farina, Mike Dunn, Fatboy Slim, just to name a few of the really prolific artists who've been DJing for 20, 30, 35 years. So what does it mean to have these prolific artists kind of leading the charge at ARC this year?
Yeah, it's part of our mission to be able to represent just every kind of facet of house and techno, and what you want to call like underground music, right? Chicago's is the birthplace of house music, is the mantra of the festival. And we all know that the influence that the city's had, and we want to showcase that in the absolute best way possible by showing all the fans the legends that are responsible for helping build his music and build this scene all the way up into, the new generations of artists that were inspired by those before them. So we find that great mixture of putting all that together, and especially taking those artists that are considered the legends or some of the leading names and founding names of the genre that have been doing this for a very long time. We want to put them at the front of that along with these other artists, because there's a lot of other festivals out there that will book some of these like legends or founders of genres, but they don't get prioritized set times, or they kind of get relegated to side stages where they're not really a central part of that picture. And we wanted to do the opposite and put every artist in equal and higher spaces and slot times and billing where it's really representative of what they've given to this music. Because there's some names that on our lineup that if they, by today's standards of set times and billings, maybe they wouldn't be playing a closing slot or a second to close slot on some of these festivals. But we look at that and we say, all right, if this artist, there's tons of them on our lineup, you can name them, right? So I won't use any for a specific example. You could say, if this artist didn't exist, none of these other artists or headliners would probably have been influenced at some point and made this, right? It's kind of an exaggeration of a stretch, but at the core of it, it explains kind of the thought process we have and the mission we put forth in trying to really pay attention to all pieces of the scene and where it come from and where it's going.
So Stu, I was kind of reading an interview with you and John, and you were talking a lot about how house really evolved in the 80s out of this virtues of unity, of connectedness, inclusion, representation, and how those are all really important considerations as you think ahead to ARC later this year. Well, I would love to know, how are you going to bring those virtues to kind of this larger festival-like experience and kind of take that underground roots of the genre and bring it to ARC in kind of this massive way?
Yeah, that is a big part of the festival, and there's so many different ways that we look at to try and bring that together. And I always think back to a conversation I had with MJ from Mural's team one time, and he kind of made a little quip about the festival itself not necessarily being underground, which is funny because when you think about it, it's somewhat true, right? Underground, I think we've all come to know and define it as, it's called underground because it kind of flies under the radar. It's a little bit counterculture at all times. And when we take it to a large scale like a festival where we're aiming to have 20,000 people a day, then it doesn't kind of defeat the purpose of that term, but that's part of our mission, is how do we still achieve the cultural feel that people have come to know from this scene and achieve that on a large scale, right? So there's so many different ways. I mean, we think about going at it. I think one of the big ones is creating an uncommodified, just kind of real experience. We don't want people to step on site and feel like they're being taken out of the club environment that they're used to feeling, right? So at the basics, we focus on just really solid production, trying not to get super gimmicky with any sort of crazy special effects or crazy production type builds. Not that those are bad, but there's a place and a time for them. ARC, we like to keep a little bit tried and true. And then same with the sound. I mean, we love just having great sound. It's in all our venues and it's at the festivals, and we see a lot of fans talking about that. So those are two things where, how do we kind of nail that feeling of still participating in the culture and being a big part of that culture from what this has all come from. And that's one of the easy ways we do it right off the bat, is just looking at the production, making it simple, making it fun, something people can get engaged in and enjoy, and same with the sound. And with the experience, we try and create something that has a little bit for everyone. It's a little bit undefined in the sense that, everyone is welcome at the festival, right? I don't think we're speaking to any particular individual when we're in the way that we brand things and market things. We really sit down, and when we talk about ARC, we're like, how do we reach people that like good music and want to hear it in a great city during good weather and have an amazing time? It's like it's that kind of unwritten picture that I think defines ARC, that is a very intrinsic kind of gut feeling that we go off of by being fans ourselves and being part of that scene, that helps us speak to and reach that audience that's out there.
Absolutely. And kind of what you just said about really keeping it about the sound and really keeping it about the music.
Mhm.
I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not sure if this is the exact quote, Chicago legend Frankie Knuckles. And, he said something along the
Yeah.
line, you got to keep it about the music. The second it becomes not about the music, you're done. And that really just called to mind this idea that, good music doesn't need extremely flashy production. It can really stand on its own. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about the roots of this genre of house. But one of the other things that I want to talk to you about, Stu, is in this interview, you kind of brought up this idea that, as we've been discussing, house is this underground genre, but, in the later 2000s, it really became this global phenomenon, especially this genre that we now know generally as tech house.
Mhm.
And, today, predominantly, a lot of people think that as a European genre, as a pretty homogenous genre. And we're seeing a really interesting trend, especially within the past maybe half decade or so, where number one, house is really coming back to the US and reconnecting with its American roots. But then secondly, like even on the main stages, that more classic sound is really fish hooking back around, and you're seeing artists like I just kind of mentioned earlier, Carl Cox, Honey Dijon, Seth Troxler, Derek Carter on the main stage at festivals like ARC. So would love if you could talk a little bit about how ARC is kind of facilitating on that bigger scale, that like return to kind of that classic sounding house.
Yeah, that's a good question. It again boils down to that kind of gut intrinsic feeling that guides us creatively, and how do we want to program things and what's appropriate for which stage. And as far as like the classic sound, I think we look to really mold or mesh the classic sounds and the new sounds together, right? You've got such a kind of explosion in the genre over the last year, and a lot of artists that are starting to make music in this genre that haven't before in the past, or changing up their sound a little bit. And when we look at art, we really try to bring everything together in a way that it flows musically and can help expose artists to new fans, but also in a way that's going to appease a lot of the more tastefully music-driven fans that come to these shows. So there's no specific formula or very complex way we go about this. It's me and John Curley, who booked the festival, it's two music heads looking at this, almost saying like, what would we want to listen to? How would we want to see this? And then maybe going a little stretch further and saying, what's a little bit creative here where we can place an artist that's not expected in this particular part of the stage, or not expected to mesh with these others, that can change things up a bit and can expose it to a new fan, or would just be fun to hear, or what's good for this time of night. There's a lot of these really creative variables that we look at that help us kind of make those decisions and place those artists in that sound. But ultimately, like with the classic sound, I think that you have a lot of fans that, because of the explosion, like right in tech house and some of these genres, you've got a lot of people that are just now discovering house and techno as a whole, that whole genre, right? And once that happens, you get people that dive deeper into the subgenres and where it came from and the roots of that sound. And I think that's what's ultimately enabling us to be able to take some of those artists that are, the heavy hitters of those genres, and some of the founders and people that have been pushing it for a long time, and now put them in those main stage slots, because you've got this whole brand new discovery of music happening, right? I mean, I think about it like, if I find a new rock band that I listen to like metal and stuff in the gym. Sometimes I'll find a band from a song that's, I don't know, from 2016 or 2010, or sometimes, and I'm just now finding them. This still happens every so often. And I go back through and I say, oh, sick, there's like 6 albums here of this brand new artist I just found I didn't know existed. I love this music. And I think that's kind of a little bit of an exaggerated example of what you have right now, where house and techno have been around so long. You've got people that are just now getting to the genre, maybe by way of these new wave artists, or just finding some of these artists, and they get to go back through and see everything that musically has happened to get us to this point, right? And there's so much out there for them to discover.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was actually earlier or last weekend I was having dinner with a friend. And he's been an EDM fan for a really long time. He's a drummer by trade, and he was just like, "Hey, I'm like, I personally am a DJ." So I was just telling him a little bit about the history of house music, and let me tell you, he was shocked to learn that house music was from Chicago. He's like, "I've been an EDM fan for 10 years, and
Yeah.
I'm now just learning that house is an American genre." He's like, "If I had to guess, I would say like Sweden, Berlin is where I would say if I had to take a stab at where house came from." But all to say, there's this definitely interesting trend of people who entered into electronic dance music, into those types of genres, really finding slowly their way into things like house and techno. And I know you guys only have like 1 year of data or anecdotal data to go on, but based on last year's festival, did you kind of see that or experience that at all? Like what were the festival goers like, and kind of what was the demographic of people who attended last year, and were there any newcomers into the genre entirely?
I think there definitely were. Judging by some of the feedback that we got, there was some first timers, but I would say the majority were more of your like seasoned kind of dance fan. They have been house and techno fans for a while. They may have attended some international festivals or other types of events similar with similar music throughout the U.S. I think this year we are seeing a lot of new fans coming in that may have not attended events of this type of music in the past. We see a lot of comments and people talking, and word spread from last year about people having such a good time at the first installment. And I think that is going to attract some new fans this year. And generally our audience is a little bit older. It's definitely like a 21 to 36 type majority crowd, I would say. But we also see a lot of the age range goes far beyond that, especially compared to some of the other like festivals and events we do that are more of like a standard like dance music genre, right? So I don't want to make it sound like it's limited just to that 21 to 36, because we see the most diversification of age range on ARC than a lot of our other events, which is awesome to see. I think that's another kind of statistic just speaking to how long house and techno has been around, that we see some of a really diverse range of audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to talk logistically about, what's going to happen at the festival this year. So, Stu, what can kind of festival goers expect this year at ARC in terms of, we've already touched on the music a little bit, but in terms of other production elements, vendors, other activities that are going to be available? Love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, they can expect amazing sound and amazing production again. That's for sure. We're looking at bringing back the same or better rigs than we had last year in terms of the sound and visual experience. We'll definitely switch up kind of the visual representation of the stages in some format to keep it fresh, give things a new look in terms of that lighting and the special effects that'll be out there. We'll be returning all three of our stages that we had last year. So the grid, which was the largest of the three stages, expansions, which is our more organic kind of built into the forest type feel of a stage that's there. That's where we have like Seth Troxler and Derek Carter last year, super fun and just kind of intimate feeling. And then we'll have the Elro stage will be returning again for all 3 days. And I think a lot of people know what to expect from Elro. If they haven't, it's just a wild, super fun, psychedelic type party. We're not gonna change up the site too much. It's gonna be a similar setup. If it's not broke, don't fix it. We got a lot of super positive comments off of last year, so we're kind of abiding by that. We're gonna take a couple things and refine them. The only little bit of feedback we got last year that was negative, everything was very positive, but the only negative thing we got was we needed more water stations. So we heard that loud and clear. We're going to have more water stations this year for sure. But I think people can expect a similar but refined experience to last year, where you'll be able to have a good time spread out with your friends and have amazing sound quality, amazing production quality, and some of the best artists in the game.
Awesome. And could you talk a little bit about what kind of ticket or pass options are available for anybody who might be interested?
Yeah, so right now there's 3 pass options. It's GA, which is our general admission ticket. We have a VIP ticket, which gets you access to some of the closer viewing areas. It gets you access to one of the larger VIP decks on the at the grid, and a couple other amenities which are all listed on the website. And then we have our icon passes, which are the ultimate VIP. It's all inclusive of food and drink. We've got a lot of great local Chicago restaurants that we have in the icon area, where all the food's included. Same with the drinks, a lot of cocktails and beers and you name it as far as what's included in that. And then other amenities such as like on-site massage, barbers, and some other really cool areas on the site that get you access with that icon ticket. With that icon ticket, you also get access to a special viewing deck on the grid stage as well as the other stages.
Awesome. And this is something that I kind of ask of everybody or all the people who I interview. If you could kind of, in a nutshell, distill it down, what are 3 words that you would use to describe the vibe at ARC this year?
3 words to describe the vibe. Can I curse?
Go for it.
Amazing fucking music. Man, there's so much to say about it, but I think at the core of it, if you could add one more word, amazing artists, amazing music, that would be another. That's the PG version if I'm allowed 4 words.
Awesome, got it. And Stu, kind of want to end on hopefully what's a little bit easier of a question for you personally.
Yeah.
You're coming up on your 2nd year doing ARC. Obviously this festival means a lot to you and kind of your team. So personally, what are you excited most about for the festival coming up here in what we have about 3 or 4 months now?
Man, I'm really excited to experience the festival in its 2nd year and be able to, I'm going to say, be a little bit more present at the festival, which isn't the best description, but last year, we were coming out of the pandemic. There was a lot of just obstacles and challenges we faced in producing a festival. There's a lot of question marks coming out of the pandemic. It was a tough year. And there was nothing that ever threatened the event, right? So I don't want to make it sound like that, but there was a lot of additional stress that came along with COVID precautions and supply chain issues and just COVID itself, because it was still a thing in terms of, it being a social conversation and events being impacted by it. So there was always that feeling in the back of your head as an event producer of, will this event happen or will COVID resurge and might we have to cancel this, right? So that's always nerve-wracking, or that was nerve-wracking, producing the event in the first year. So from a very personal standpoint, and being very real, I'm looking forward to being in the clear of that this year, knowing what we have in the event and that fans are really into this concept and being able to be out there and experience that and enjoy it with everyone. I definitely had a fun time and got to experience it last year with everyone, but getting to that point was definitely one of the more challenging parts of their career. And I'm looking forward to a lot of the artists on the bill, especially the Elroy tent. It's always a super fun time. I spend a lot of time in there.
Awesome, man. Well, this has been my pleasure. Obviously, Thank you for joining us on Gray Area. Always a pleasure, Stu, to kind of talk to somebody who enjoys good fucking music. So, we are super excited for you to join us today.
Yeah, likewise. Great talking with you as always. Thanks for your time.